Hi, it's Cayman with S&B, and today we're going to be installing our 47-gallon replacement tank on this 2019 Sprinter 144 wheelbase. If you've already bought an S&B tank, take out this installation card from the box and scan this QR code with your phone, and it's going to take you to our most up-to-date installation instructions with pictures and step-by-step instructions. The first step is going to be making sure you have nothing mounted in between the rear part of the tank and the rear axle, so anything mounted up here, because our tank is going to extend here all the way to here, as well as making sure there's nothing protruding through the cab. Like if you have nails, bolts, make sure that those are flush with the underside of the cab, as well as making sure you have nothing mounted in front of the tank. So if there's anything in front of the tank in between the tank and the transfer case, that's not gonna work because our tank extends forward as well. But if you do have a water tank mounted outside of the tank, so in between this section, and it works with the OEM tank, it's gonna work with the S&B tank as well. Now we're gonna be removing the filler from the tank, removing this hose clamp, and there's gonna be probably a little bit of fuel that trickles out here. There's a check valve at the base of the tank, but that doesn't keep all the fuel inside the tank. There might be some fuel built up in this little section, and we'll find out. I didn't mean to do that, but if you do keep the hose connected to the filler neck for a little bit, I guess a little bit of fuel will trickle out, so it doesn't all come out at once. Thank you, Mercedes, for putting all the fuel connectors and the electrical connector visible to the installer. Usually you have to reach up on top of the tank to remove these, but now we're gonna be removing the feed, the return, as well as the electrical connector. These are the only three connectors we're gonna be removing. To remove these connectors, you pull up on these fingers, you pull out and they just slide right out. The white one as well. And then we'll just separate it. Make sure they're pulled all the way out. Now to remove the electrical connector, you just depress this tab on the back and slide it right off. Snip this one zip tie that's holding this electrical connector in. Next, we're going to be lifting up the jack underneath the tank because we will be removing the 3 OEM straps on the fuel tank. Starting with the rear strap with an 11mm socket, we are going to be removing the rear strap. We will be reusing these OEM bolts, so keep track of these. Repeat this process for all 3 straps. Now that we have the 3 straps removed, we're going to be lowering the tank, and if you have a buddy, this would be a good time to have him give you a hand. Very good. Now that we have the OEM tank out of the van, we are going to be removing the OEM locking ring. So we'll be hitting this counterclockwise. Now we'll be removing these clips. And transferring all this over to the S&B tank, making sure the S&B black O-ring is in the O-ring groove, and also checking the inside of the S&B tank to make sure there's no debris or nothing got in the tank during shipping. When you're pulling out this sending unit, there is a snake-like venturi that's going to the back of the tank. So just be careful and try to dump out as much fuel as you can into the OEM tank. So now you can see the black hose dumping out all the fuel. Make sure that S&B O-ring's in the O-ring groove. And there's an arrow on the tank right here. And that arrow is where this tab on the center unit should be lined up. Right there. So right in that spot. It's the only spot the tab can be placed because of the size and spacing. So it drops in. Once we have it there, we're going to get that locking ring started and snap in these connectors. Now we'll be hitting the ring clockwise to lock down the locking ring. And we're going to be hitting it until this indentation, or this goes underneath the indentation on the receiving teeth. So it needs a few more hits. And there it is. It's passed and sealed. To make sure we got a good seal on the O-ring, we are going to be removing these connectors and pressurizing the tank, and then spray some soapy water around here to see if there's any leaks before we get it into the tank. And we are not going to be disconnecting the auxiliary tap if you do have one, but instead we're just going to have someone put their hand over that end. Now with a couple extra hands blocking off the open ports, rather than using caps, we're going to poke a hole in the red cap that was provided on the tank, and we'll be pressurizing the tank, looking for bubbles around the O-ring area. So we don't have a PSI to pressurize the tank to, but just a few pumps. You'll kind of feel the outer wall expand a little bit, just enough to create a leak. And it looks good. We don't hear or see anything from the O-ring area. Now we'll be removing the hose clamp from the filler hose. Pulling this off, taking the S&B provided inlet check valve with the flow arrow. That flow arrow is going to be going into the tank. So here's how we pulled it off. We're going to push this in. Flow arrow is going to be going into the tank. So we'll get this started. And when we push it onto the S&B tank, it'll naturally push this white piece further in to the hose. But we can do our best now to get that started. Okay. Now we'll tighten down this hose clamp. Now we'll be pulling off this vent hose. Easier than I thought. Removing that from the OEM tank and sliding it into the beautifully designed groove on the S&B tank. And once it's on, make sure that this is behind here. It looks like small, but when you put this into the van, the cab sits right here. So if this is on top, this will get pinched in between the cab. You'd hate for this to crack and spring a leak or anything like that. So make sure it's behind, and when you're putting it into the tank, just double check to make sure it's behind still. Now before putting the tank back in, just make sure these connectors are back over. Now to keep these hoses connected to this body of the tank, we'll be zip tying around here. And turn it off. So we made a small change to how we install this rear strap. If your tank did come equipped with these toggle nuts, you can go ahead and install these and follow along with the next step in the install video. There's no issue with installing these. These work great, but we did switch to these plus nuts. So if your tank came included with this bag of gold-plated plus nuts and 3 bolts, you're gonna take these out, and these will be in the following step. And these are gonna work by installing these into the hole, the same hole that we were using for these toggle nuts. Then once it's installed into the hole, on the underside, you'll use this steel piece, the longer bolt holding the base of the steel piece. You will tighten it up with a 17mm socket until this is completely squeezed and the plus nut is flat, giving you a nice good locking force on the back side of that cross member. Now we're gonna be drilling out this hole in the cross member. One's already the correct size, but we need this hole to be the correct size so we can put in our cage nut. After we drill that out, we're gonna be hitting it with spray paint, or if you have automotive paint, just to coat the inside to prevent any corrosion. Now we're gonna be putting these into the cross member on the van. So we'll be twisting it, pushing it in, then it'll naturally straighten out. Now we're gonna be putting the S&B tank in the van. One thing we're gonna be looking out for is that hose on the back of the tank. We're gonna be pushing that through the cross member and connecting it to the bar before we put the straps on or before the tank is all the way in place. But we'll get started. Now we'll be jacking the tank into place, and when we get close enough to push that rear hose through that cross member hole, we're going to be pushing it through. There we go, and it's seated. Now we'll be jacking the tank all the way into place. Once we get closer, we'll make sure everything looks lined up so you can kind of see where the tank should go, and we'll start shifting it around. Now we'll be pushing on the feed and the return. You hear it snap. Then once the tank is all into place, we'll push on this electrical connector. Now we'll be pushing on the fill hose. Once it's pushed on past the barb, we'll tighten it up with the hose clamp. So we're probably going to be labeling all the straps in the box, but you can see the difference. 1 is obviously really wide, 4 is skinny, 2 and 3 are about the same, but 3 is a little bit wider. So we're going to start with strap number 3. So we're going to be doing strap number 3 to start. We are going to be putting into place the shorter side goes on the frame, and we're going to be putting the jack underneath the strap just to push the strap up and the tank up in that position to make it easier to get on these bolts that aren't too long. So we're not going to tighten these bolts all the way until we get all the other straps on. So one mistake we made is positioning the lift pad. We had the lift pad too far towards the tank. So we have it right in front of that bolt, but next time we're going to move this so it's sticking out a little bit further. It's still underneath the frame, but it's not protruding into the tank space. But now we're going to begin, after we did the third strap, we're going to be doing the first strap, and this is going to help position the tank so we can do the rear strap next. Then after that we'll do the second strap. So again, the order is 3, 1, 4, 2. We'll get this bolt started. Now with the provided hardware, we're going to take a 3/4 inch socket and tighten up this rear strap. And to finish up the install, go back and torque down all the bolts. Then also go check to make sure there's nothing touching on the top of the tank. So there's nothing getting pinched, no lines are getting pinched on the top of the tank. and double check all the fuel connectors are connected. So the 2 fuel connectors, if you have an auxiliary tap, make sure that's connected, as well as your electrical. Then the install is complete. Go and fill it up, make sure there's no leaks, and you'll be all set. If you have any questions or if there's anything we can do for you, our number is 909-675-1313. Thanks for choosing S&B.